Trauma. That's a really heavy word. That word carries with it a certain amount of emotional weight. And when we use that word, we're probably describing an experience that impacted negatively upon us to such a degree that it left long-term emotional damage. Trauma is often regarded as that next level emotional issue that can take years to get over, and often we might never expect to fully move on from. However, does that really have to be the case? In this video, I want to talk about how trauma affects us, what our mind is really trying to do in those instances, and how we might navigate our way to the other side of it so we can emerge emotionally unscathed. I'm Tim Box, mind coach and remedial hypnotist, and this is Trauma and What You Really Need to Know to Move On. Now, there seems to be a debate that rages online regarding trauma. That debate is all about what actually qualifies as a genuinely traumatic experience, as opposed to just an unpleasant or negative one. Some would like to reserve the word trauma for a specific level or category of event, whereas others would like to open up the term to encompass a much wider range of experiences. I've seen articles written urging people to stop referring to what they went through as trauma, suggesting the overuse of the term invalidates and trivializes those times when someone has been through a genuinely traumatizing experience. But I've also heard the other side of that argument, suggesting that it's unfair and dismissive to say that what we went through doesn't qualify as a genuine trauma. What is it about your experience that means it inherently carries more psychological weight than mine? For my part, I don't tend to do diagnostic work when I'm helping a client. I'm not particularly interested in how we define what we're dealing with. I'm more interested in how we get the changes. So if a client comes to me speaking of trauma, then I'm usually happy to accept that it's trauma that we're dealing with. And if they don't use that word, then I probably won't either. The bottom line here is that we don't define trauma according to the nature of the event. We define it by the effect it has on us. It's not what happened, it's how our mind reacted to what happened. Trauma in psychological terms is often defined as a negative or distressing experience that our mind is, for whatever reason, unable to completely process. This can have a negative impact on us in a number of different ways, and is why we might conclude that our mind has been damaged by the experience. We might find ourselves unable to engage in certain activities or situations in the future that too closely resemble some aspect of what we went through. We might experience negative or alarming thoughts out of nowhere as our mind revisits the memory in a continued attempt to process what happened. We might find ourselves unable to rest, sleep, or just switch off because our mind is still ruminating on the traumatic experience. So yes, trauma can be the result of extraordinary challenges like going to war or living through childhood abuse, but it can also come from being bullied at school or being excessively scolded for doing something wrong. It can also sometimes be the result of witnessing or just imagining something bad happening. Anytime our mind has to come up with a new emotional strategy in the face of a learning experience, and it struggles to fully understand it and fails to achieve a satisfactory or appropriate response, or to create an adequate emotional strategy going forward, then the effect of that is what we might refer to as trauma. But the good news here is that as weighty as the term might feel, what we go through doesn't inherently have to dictate the way we feel, think, or behave in the future. So a couple of years ago, I gave a TED talk. A lot of the speakers and attendees were in the bar of the venue after the event, and I was approached by three ladies who turned out to be psychiatrists. We got talking and they were kind of quizzing me a little about how I worked with my clients. They asked about anxiety and depression, expressing frustration at how long it can take to get changes for their clients. At some point, they asked me how many sessions I would usually take to help someone dealing with trauma. Now, I use a 3-session protocol for pretty much every client I see, and I told them this. The question came back, how on earth can you treat trauma in 3 sessions? Now, I'm not convinced I had a fabulous answer for them at the time, as I'd never been asked that question before. Their model was that trauma was deep-rooted and would take more work to get past than most other issues. My model was that it was a pattern of thought. If we can understand why that particular pattern of thought is there and why it no longer needs to be, then we can probably help the client let go of it. You see, I'm not necessarily seeing trauma as damage or emotional scarring. I'm seeing it as a response to a particular challenge. The challenge being, how do I process this? Every time something bad happens, a part of our mind gets the job of working out what we did to cause that, or what did we fail to do to not avoid it. And in the light of that information, what do we do differently in the future to stay safe from it happening to us again? In many instances, that piece of processing occurs very quickly. We put our hand on the hot stove, we get burnt, we're a little bit more careful where we put our hand in the future. But in the case of certain experiences, we didn't actually do anything to cause it, and we couldn't necessarily have avoided it even if we'd seen it coming. In the case of certain experiences, what happened was so far outside of the realms of what we understand life to be that we struggle to make any sense of it at all. And yet that part of our mind needs to understand what happened well enough to keep us safe and happy moving forward. Until it does that, it can't move on. This is why our responses become confused. This is why we revisit the experience in our mind. This is why we're unable to shut down and fully relax anymore. A part of us simply can't rest until it has the answers. However, this is often an unsolvable puzzle. It's like a jigsaw with half the pieces missing. We'll never complete it because the pieces we would need to do that just aren't there. I remember the first client I had who was dealing with trauma. She'd come to see me to reduce her drinking. She explained to me on the phone that she just couldn't control it. Now, for some reason, I was expecting to meet someone who didn't have much going on in their life. But instead, I met a wonderful lady who had a great group of friends, a loving family, and a busy social diary. The problem for her was that when she got home from whatever lunch or club she'd been to that day, she felt she needed to drink. She said she couldn't stand being alone because her mind went to a dark place and drink was the only thing that shut those thoughts down. I asked her what that dark place was, and she told me about how her son had killed himself a few years earlier. She was the last person to talk to him on the phone and had always wondered what she could have said differently to help him and prevent it from happening. As you can imagine, there were misplaced feelings of guilt there as well, but the main problem was all the questions. Why did it happen? How could I have stopped it? How do I make sense of something like that? This was just an initial consultation to see if we could work together on this. We didn't do any change work that day, but I did speak to her about the idea of the unsolvable puzzle. I told her that if we choose to work together on this, then we might be letting that part of her mind know that this puzzle it's trying to solve isn't actually solvable. The information we would need to fully process this event simply isn't there, because how is something like that ever going to make sense? The fact is that some experiences in life can only be filed away under the category of that doesn't make sense, but that's okay because not everything in life is going to make sense. I explained how ultimately we want that part of our mind to stop being burdened with the unsolvable puzzle and allow it to work on the puzzles that can be solved. And these, of course, are the puzzles of today. We can't change the past. We can only decide how we respond in the future. This idea seemed to resonate with her. She went away having booked some sessions with me to work on this. For various reasons, the first one was booked in for about a month's time. When she came back, she asked me what I'd done to her in the consultation. I said nothing, we just talked. She told me she hadn't touched a drink since that meeting. She hadn't needed to. Her mind was no longer going to that dark place, no longer trying to solve that puzzle. In fact, when she was alone, now she didn't even like answering the phone. She didn't want her me time interrupted. She said to me, I think my mind realised it didn't have to do that anymore. It's instances like this, which is why I don't think trauma has to scar us for life, and it doesn't have to inflict lasting emotional damage. Guaranteed, what we went through was beyond what we should ever have had to process. Challenging perhaps in ways we never expected to be challenged. But sometimes we'll need to accept that not everything in life will make sense, and not all puzzles can be solved. If we can allow the part of our mind that's still trying to make sense of this to put that puzzle away now, then just maybe we can free ourselves of that burden. Now, whenever I speak to people about trauma and what they've been through sounds way too heavy to deal with, I always remind myself that trauma is just a word for an experience our minds struggle to make sense of and adequately process. And I also remind myself of the lady whose mind went to a dark place but came out the other side. Thanks for watching this video. If you've enjoyed this one, then why not check out some of the other episodes, and please remember to hit the subscribe button, as it helps the channel grow and means I can create more videos just like this one. But that's it for now. I'm Tim Box, mind coach and remedial hypnotist. Be kind to your mind, and I'll see you next time.